There's been a lot of updates, I'm sure, but the primary thing that has been the last at least 8 months or so has been just making sure NervesHub can scale like really far. And we also have his last name is blanking at the second, Josh, I think K, has and Lars has been working on NervesHub for NervesCloud. Beginning of the year, got it easy to start up on like Fly and anything that can run Docker. Kind of as part of that, the big push for us was to get our ours is a SmartRent kind of more standardized with everything else because it was the AWS setup that was fairly complicated and using a bunch of little scripts everywhere. So now we've have updated stuff for that. And as part of that, I spent way too long feeling stupid doing just trying to deploy kind of what we did in terms of Docker updates and all of that. So what it turned out to be was Bandit. We switched to Bandit, and that was tricky to discover that it was Bandit because it was kind of smack in the middle of a bunch of updates from where we had been. And Bandit, first, I don't think even Matt Trudell knows why it set so linger, but that ended up being the issue because we could ramp a like three servers up to like 20,000 devices a piece, and then as soon as they disconnected, it just killed all of them. Like the run queues just went wild and had no idea what was going on. So that was a very tricky thing to discover what the heck was happening. But the good thing is that as part of that 3 months, I nicked away at enough other little tiny things that cumulatively, like once we got rid of Solinger, NervesHub was in a very good state to um, boost up to at least 500,000 devices is kind of what we've load tested on our QA. So like we're uh, in a NervesHub is in a very good state should you have a extremely large fleet of devices. And yeah, we could like we're at the point where you could have 500,000 devices, probably even a lot more. Turn off your production, turn it on again, and then have all of them show up at roughly the exact same time, and it just doesn't even phase it. So the Thundering Herd is like not an issue at all anymore, which has been a pretty great thing to deal with. I guess the other big thing that I've two things since then. We now have archives, which are also known as slots in other things, or I don't know. We picked the term archives. We didn't don't super like the term or whatever. But this is a way of pushing an additional package to your devices. So like if you have just something you want to update separately or push to more than one like specific archive platform or architecture, you see these are just labeled generic. So this is a way of just zipping up and like cryptographically signing and all that to download a package and just unzip it in a folder and you can have it. So we're using it for some like manifest stuff to be able to do, yeah, just kind of more generic things that need to be updated separately. And this will let us have a more strict mechanism for updating it and pushing it out through a deployment. Because that's the other thing, it goes through a deployment. So when you edit it, you can pick an additional archive. So if you want to send this one along with it or whatever. So it's not too terribly exciting, and it's a lot less handholdy, or it's yeah, like it'll just kind of give you the file unzipped and be like, there you go do whatever you want. Because it's such a application specific thing. The other big thing that I worked on is this scripts. So this is the way to we're specifically using it to allow like a support team to do stuff on a hub without giving them access to it. So this is a like someone who has production NervesHub access will write these, and it is a thing that can't be edited by the person. So it's just a way of handing out kind of a very restricted way of triggering these things. And right now it's only through the API, just because of how we're using it. But if you don't have an updated NervesHub link, which no one will because it's still in a PR, this will actually send it through the console channel and like just scrape what comes back and can kind of like trim it down as much as it can. But hopefully going forward, we can, I eventually found that XUnit has a capture IO, which does some group leader shenanigans to just snag output. So this is doing something similar, and we are just code evaluating whenever it gets sent down. So it's very make sure whoever's writing this is trusted. That's kind of it in terms of big things, I think. I would expect to see a lot more kind of in the next few months as Josh and Lars get going. I know they have lots of big ideas, especially for NervesCloud. I don't know if anyone's seen just kind of other things that I'm thinking of. This is the new console. This is, I think, might have happened beforehand, but there's now a chat in the sidebar. Something else that has that is useful for debugging if you want to. There we go. Send file. So if we do data cert.m, it'll actually download it from your browser. And then you can do the reverse. If you drag a file on here, it'll upload it and stick it on the device. So you can do some file manipulation through NervesHub, which is helpful for debugging purposes. Then I can't see it because there's little bars in the way, but as you upload stuff, it'll show in the sidebar. So it's like not everyone connected will download the file just because of how Phoenix Channels is working, and it wasn't worth figuring out how to send it to the person that actually hit enter. Yeah, when you upload, it'll say like NervesHub started uploading a file, finished uploading a file, so it's not sneaky if there's more than one person. We have this first connect code. I think that's been there a very long time, but when devices connect, you can send whatever blob you want. I'll go through the console channel. You can use and abuse this to your heart's content. And I know it has been abused by at least one person on my company to do lots of interesting things.
The identify button there looks new.
Yeah, I was about to say this. I don't have the actual RPI 0 is in another room, but if you were holding it up and click this button, it would blink itself. So it's a callback in the client that Frank made a joke in the NervesHub channel in Elixir Slack of it crashes your socket to reconnect it, because for a while our hubs hadn't updated the client, so it sent a message, and then because NervesHub link doesn't have like a catch-all, so then it just crashed the socket and reconnected. So it was like a very I hated it, but it was used to get around some tracker shenanigans. So but now it'll let you I don't know if we've actually set it up in SmartRent, but all the stuff I have just like uses Deluxe to blink something to be like, yes, it's that one. And this was primarily because I've moved recently, so most of it's in boxes, but there's a box over there with like 30 pies that I just had like stacked up. And so when you're like, which one of you is not working? And I'm staring at, that has been handy. Let's see, deployments looks a little different. If anyone's not seen this, it's just sorting by the platform. Deployments can also have on-connect code, so you can send it to anything that's attached to it or just a specific device. We have rolling updates. This is kind of a best effort, and it might go beyond 100%. Oh, yeah, this is one of the things that Josh added and is now the default in NervesHub Link, is this shared device secret. So it's a way of just kind of not needing to do crypto stuff. So it's just an easier way to get you set up and using NervesHub. There's also, I think you can do device-specific tokens. I don't know if I can see any of it, but I think there's a way to do that. It's on a product, I think, and then also I think there's a way to do device-specific. I don't super remember because we don't use that, so I haven't super paid.
There's a foundation for it, but it's not been implemented.
There we go.
But the idea is you could use a product from any device product token, and then it can issue device tokens, and you can do rotations of these device tokens without having to do more, restrictive measures.
Yeah, I don't know. There's been a lot deleted if you haven't seen NervesHub since December 2022. I know after a year, I ended up as a net negative contributor to NervesHub, so that was pretty sweet. I still might be. I haven't actually checked in a while, but it's super weird to work at a company for a year and have deleted more than you've added. But it's a fun thing to do. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have too much more else. A lot of it's just been dealing with scaling troubles, and none of it's very exciting because it's makes DevOps upset when you're just kind of pushing stuff and be like, I hope this works.
Where do people go to get NervesHub and try it out and figure out how to use it?
So it's all on GitHub at the NervesHub web. Looks like we just added LiveView, right? Yeah, I saw that. I guess that got merged, and then yeah. So it's good.
One thing to point out here is every commit publishes. We build a Docker image and publish onto there. So there's pull the source, run some things. If you go back to the code where you were, and then on the side, just under the releases, is where you can see the registry. Over there on the right.
I couldn't scroll. I don't know what happened.
Oh, there's packages. This is technically the registry. You can go get a pre-made image and run it. Josh has this deployed and running on Fly.io, so that's an option to run it yourself. Josh and Lars are building up a public instance called NervesCloud, and NervesCloud.com, I believe it is. And so that's another avenue to go get an invite, add a few devices, and play around with that.
And it sounds like the setup nowadays is a lot easier too, because instead of having to generate SSH keys and do the signing and all that, like Eric showed off a little bit, now you can use the pre-shared keys to get up and running. So you just roll a pre-shared key, put it on NervesHub, put that on your device, the key being like a string instead of a SSH key. And now you can get a test fleet up and talking to it and test out those NervesHub features.
Yeah, and it's actually worse than an SSH key. It was a OpenSSL signed stuff. So, yeah.
Cool. Eric, can I veto your lack of excitement for archives? I gotta say, I've been dying for archives for a long time because the place where they can really help, where we've had pain points around it, is what happens when you have other firmware on that Nerves device. So, like, what if you're running a microcontroller and you need to push some firmware out to that? And I think John's got some comments on this too. We've typically dumped things in the rootfs overlay, like firmware binaries in there, and I really don't like having to commit binaries into the rootfs overlay in GitHub for that project. So this looks like a really cool way to be able to keep those other binaries and stuff outside of your Nerves application, like out of that repository, but that you still have a mechanism to be able to pull them down and get them on disk to those devices.
Yep.
I came in late, but did we show some of the archives? We show some of the setup?
I didn't show anything, mostly because I'm not sure if we're allowed to say how we're using it or not. So, John, if you know.
Well, it's open source. It's pretty free form.
Yeah.
We effectively just make a zip file that is, the idea is you can kind of build this manifest, and you just need a versioned manifest of some sort. And yeah, it's a zip file. We have a little JSON in it, and that just, it has all the instructions of here's a version of a firmware or binary or whatever for a device, and here's where you go get it. And then we let our hubs do that upkeep. They know the version of these devices. They know if it's now outdated or something. They can go through this manifest and they can, like, it's almost like NervesHub delegating firmware update to a device to then do the firmware update on these external ones.
Yeah, and you can stick whatever you want in this thing. So like this, we just have a JSON file, but you can add the binaries directly. You can just make a file that's links to your things and let it go download elsewhere. Or so it's just a FWP file. So do whatever you want.
Can a device ask for a specific archive?
So an archive is handed to a device when they connect, if their deployment has one right now. So it's kind of tied with the deployment. So you can have, like, if you know that version 2 of your firmware needs like this set of microcontroller updates, whatever, like that's sent with that, with the deployment. So there's no way of specifically requesting it currently. But I mean, if that's the thing people need, then it's an API away.
Archives would be a fun thing to get others' views and ideas and opinions, and it's very, we built out this purpose thing that we needed quickly, but it could probably be expanded. It could probably be done differently or better. And to John's question, I would also say that only recently have we started adding in pieces that the device can then reach out to the server to request data or send data. We used to keep the relationship pretty restricted in that the device would always have to be told something, that NervesHub was the only source of truth and facilitator, and the whatever data the device was sending back up was usually reactionary to whatever the server said.
Yeah, I'm kind of use case of where there is a fleet of deployed devices, but each device has a different set of requirement of microcontroller firmware that it needs.
Yes.
For other things that it is controlling.
Yeah. So right now, the way that you'd probably handle that is you'd have a deployment set up per type of thing that's controlling stuff, based on tags, and you tag it appropriately and all that fun stuff. So Uh, maybe a bit cumbersome, but I think you could make it work. The other thing that I know we want archives to do that we just haven't had a company need for yet is multiple like archives. And then you can name like what it is. So like a name slot or whatever. Because right now we only need this like firmware updates, but I know people have big ideas of like other stuff that this could be used for. So we don't want to just jam it all in one archive. So like add some kind of a type when you're in the deployment of like this, like just type something in that's like, this is a microcontroller update. This one is a set of pictures for the kiosk or whatever. So you can send different things down. And then your application would just get like, here's this unzipped file or folder, and this is the kind of thing that I'm telling you about. And then you can do whatever you want based on that. So that's one big feature for sure that it's missing and is somewhere in the future.
In terms of like bandwidth, if you have got two deployments that would want the same archive, would they download it twice? Like version 1 and version 2 of my firmware, but they both need to archive version 1.
As long as the archive is the same UUID, I believe NervesHub Link caches that.
So the archives get stored to disk, right?
Yeah. And so
that's the deciding factor. You have two firmwares, but every firmware shares the root or the application partition. That doesn't change between firmwares, and that's where we typically will write the archive files. And so when the next firmware comes up and it still needs it, it would be able to see that it still has. NervesHub would tell it, here's archive version 1, 2, 3, 4, and it would see that it still has that, so it would forego downloading it a second time.
Is there a possibility of failed downloads or accumulated downloads overflowing a partition or anything?
Isn't there always?
Yeah. Yeah, so we download to this like that download thing, and then once it's done, it'll move it out of that. But like once it's downloaded and unzipped, it just lives there forever, and it's kind of up to you to not blow your disk. So,
oh, sorry, it's in the data path. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We had something way back when where like the other alternate firmware slot was failing, and that filled up some partition, I think. So just thinking about stuff that burned us in the past.
Yeah. I know Frank just added a PR that throttles the download to how quickly FOAP is writing to the disk. So I believe it should just be streaming straight to the other partition at least going forward. So hopefully that specific issue doesn't happen again.
I've run into that issue when adding, I think it was UI components, UI assets, when you're adding more graphics and stuff like that, and then you find out, oh, hey, you've run it, and this is like the rootfs overlay type method where all of it's packed into your OS partition, the read-only partitions, and you find out, oh, wait, now you have to somehow expand those partitions in the field to be able to get your new firmware bundle on there. And so one of the cool things that it looks like about with archives here is possibly even if you're able to put your UI assets in there to a certain extent. Now this is like you're showing off here, this is all downloading on your application partition now. That's read write and probably much bigger than the A or B partitions are for the OS. So that looks pretty cool right there of possibly being able to avoid that issue that Mike just brought up. Because yeah, all that stuff is just in a much bigger space now. Do you guys on the SmartRent side have any thoughts on the UI side or that disk filling up side of things? I see the gears are turning in John's head.
We will probably run into it soon if it's going to happen, because we have a.
Yeah. Hey. Hey, Eric. We should be safe. I knew about this issue before. I didn't.
Okay, then there we
go. Hopefully, sufficiently large, unless someone goes crazy with video, and then, well, we'll have to figure something else because the firmwares will be maybe a little bit more than we can do over LTE.
Yeah, there's also that.
We also don't really download new UI assets. Like, we're not refreshing UI assets from a connection. Well, we don't do a lot of UI assets, and then what we do it's in the new firmware, which is why, as we think about this problem as people, I guess that makes sense. Like, if you're deploying something that's UI based or doing some web server, you might want to just, this is the idea of those firmware slots as well. You might want to just update the slots with the next version of the assets rather than a whole new firmware deploy. And you would want that on the big part, the application partition, the writable, it's filled the rest of the space.
Yeah, I'll say I've had to do a FWUP complete upgrade, not the one partition upgrade, the whole reformat the disk partition in the field, and that was a little bit of a scary moment, not gonna lie.
In the field.
In the field, yeah.
Was it over LTE connection, I hope?
It was, I think it was Wi-Fi, if I remember correctly. So LTE would have been scarier.
Depends on your Wi-Fi.
Jason said adding a dummy data file as a preserver. That's interesting. Let's just add like a 50 megabyte file, and that's like reserve. You oopsie fill up, just delete the file and get yourself some breathing room. Huh.
Yeah, there's it might be good if you can feel free to chime in here on the recording to clarify things, because two things go through my head. Number one is if that's on the application partition, yeah, you could delete that and still have the space for that artifact. If it's on the A or the B partition, the dummy file is not going to save you because those settings are in the FWUP conf of how your partition scheme is laid out, and you're redoing your FWUP conf to fix that problem.
Yeah.
I think if I could fix something, is it 10 or so years ago when the partition sizes were made with the Raspberry Pis that people were using at the time? I'd make it a little bit bigger, but at the time, it seemed huge. And now that we've started doing so much more, they seem small. And I think the moral of the story is if you're making a new product, maybe maybe make them real big now, since storage is pretty cheap these days.
It's a classic. Who's going to ever need more than 128 kilobytes?
It's bigger than that. But yeah.
This is all the storage stuff. Anytime I have to decide if there's storage on buying a new machine or upgrading a hard drive or whatever, I now definitely err on big. Getting a new phone, just get the big one. Media is only getting larger. Any other steaming questions?
Yeah, I'm surprised I'm going to be the one that asks this, but having a fleet of devices in the field with NervesHub 1, is there a clear upgrade path to 2?
Slowly walk through commits. I don't know that. So I believe there is one migration that at least locally gave me trouble. And it was just like deleting something that was already deleted, so you could just kind of skip it. But otherwise, you should be able to just let the migrations run, and make sure you got backups. Do it in QA first.
So, maybe some of the bigger things, or one of the bigger things that would probably be hardest, is that we changed to make device identifiers globally unique.
Yeah.
And so if you have a series of products and organizations and you've replicated device identifiers between different orgs, you'll immediately run into a problem there.
And I don't know that this will happen or not, but I know products being globally unique has been kind of hinted at or tossed around mostly through URL uniqueness in some GitHub issues. So that might be another thing possibly coming up in the future.
I got another question that ties into that for you guys, because it's what's been going through my head for how to deal with an upgrade like this. And the thought of potentially losing all of your OTA and all of your NervesHub in that upgrade if you don't get NervesHub migrated over correctly and and like run your sequence of migrations and get all that and apply your patches in the right order, if you will. Is it possible to leave your current instance alone, stand up a new version of NervesHub v2, put your keys on, get your keys copied over, and then gradually migrate devices over so that the devices, you point them to a new URL, but other than that, they don't really know or care which version of NervesHub they're talking to?
Yes, I think if you are on a NervesHub link, anything newer than 2.0, it probably will still talk to the old one. But you could definitely, like, if you have your old, like 1.0 NervesHub, and just when you do your firmware updates, just change your NervesHub link config to point at the new one. When that gets updated, it'll just show up on the new one, and as long as you've got keys imported correctly and all of that, then your devices shouldn't care. So that's definitely a probably a much easier way to make sure you don't break stuff.
Yeah, and so it sounds like then if you've got a NervesHub link version conflict where like you can't do that upgrade for some reason on NervesHub link, maybe just use like the firmware validation feature to where if your new version of firmware doesn't end up connecting up to your new NervesHub v2 for some reason, then it'll auto roll back to the old one.
Yeah.
Cool. That sounds a lot less scary to me than modified your sole version of NervesHub.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, one of those should start with yeet.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of just like YOLO, here we go.
And I mean, I don't know. There's some aspects.
Well, it's just I guess it's more when it's time to deploy. Because I know you, John, we're just like, let's go, here we go. Deploy it.
Yep. Get a try.
So, yep. But I don't think like we do. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The biggest things would probably be changing your setup. So, in how you deploy the server. That's where I think we made a lot of the bigger, harder changes. Because we really cleaned up. We really were removing the restriction on AWS. We ripped it out of the umbrella. We totally changed the way to be able to spin up different types of nodes. Everything running on one versus this runs the API. This node only runs device connections. This node only runs web. And that, depending upon how you have this thing set up to deploy, that might be the bigger hurdle.
Yeah, and there are a handful of migrations that are kind of one way. I don't know that we specifically delete anything, but I know we've like roles are modified a bit. And there's like we like renamed one or unrenamed it. I don't really remember, but there's like enough small shuffles that it might not work if you need to just like totally roll back. So yeah, I think it's just, yeah, QA is your friend here.
Are there new Terraform scripts to deal with the infrastructure, or what did you end up deciding to do around that?
Deleted them.
Nope.
Gone.
What we did is remove infrastructure concerns and opinions, and we just left it as a Phoenix application, and we build a Docker image as a convenience that you can use because several people deploy based on Docker images. But that's not
like
the requirement.
SmartRent uses that Docker, but we as like a from, and then we kind of insert our own stuff to go from there. So that's probably what most people would want to do if you're either on the old or you're in ACS and kind of had that set up. We have we moved all of those ECS scripts into an m.sh file to be like, go download all the S3 stuff, go set up your cluster, like that kind of stuff. So
I guess I'm also curious. I think it says, Clay, you have V1. Have you changed any pieces of NervesHub, or were you just deploying what the commits that we had?
I don't think we've done any customizations to it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the bigger changes have just been internally. So going through a lot of commits at once, I don't think it's going to be too detrimental.
Yeah, and a lot of it has been deleting code and not necessarily your data. I'd have to double check that because that's a very bold thing to stand on without having seen migrations in a while. But because I know our DevOps was they kept pushing for a while of like, don't delete table names or whatever, like migrate into a new one if you're like renaming things or whatever. So I'm not sure we cleaned up everything after those kind of stuff. So yeah,
no, we're pretty good on all that. I mean,
yeah,
we have a DevOps team that's very, very, very cautious about database changes. And so lots of thought and review went into those pieces. I'm breezing through the commits right now. Like there's just several sections of time of which I know what we were doing. Like we tried to do distributed state and we added gproc and we tried to do all of these things in there. And all of those commits are basically effectively gone now. So there's this huge chunk of history and time that looks daunting, but is now unused. And
yeah, so around
fixes here and there.
Yeah. I think it's mostly just adding stuff, it looks like. So this one you'll probably run into the create unique index. I think there's a new unique index coming. I think I just saw. Maybe it got merged. Yeah, there has not been a lot of migrations if this goes back 10 months.
Isn't there like an export devices feature or something like that? Am I crazy?
There is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you could potentially export all your devices and then re-import it. Well, I don't know if the format's changed or anything, but.
Well, the import in the UI got deleted, so you'd have to API update it. But yeah, that's definitely
we deleted the import.
Yeah, because you were like, I'm the only one that's ever used it, and it was like janky. So I was like, bye bye.
Those negative code commits. Yeah, another problem we're probably going to have is we have devices that have very, very old firmware that have not yet connected. They're not technically unboxed. And so they would be configured to connect to the old NervesHub with the old NervesHub link, etc.
Yeah, I'm unsure if John or Frank might know more of this, but I know we had a similar issue of I think John has a wall in his office of just like when productions run happened, that thing does never changes its firmware to know that if it gets unboxed, it'll still connect. And to my knowledge, they still do.
When we, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I call them my little canary devices, and they always persist connection, and they connect to QA. So if we ever deployed something, and all of those LEDs went off or something, then we know boxed up devices will fail to connect, and it's a no-go, no deploy.
Yeah.
So,
and I think
oh, sorry.
The biggest reason that things have failed has been SSL mismatches between OTP updates. So that
there was really only one very terrible version to have. There was an OTP 24.2 something that if your device had that version, it would just it was terrible. That was the worst. So we made lots of adjustments to be able to try to deal with that. Your case would be interesting because if you take the route of updating your server, then you're just kind of guessing if these box devices can't connect. They'll have the same URL, but so you probably would want to get that firmware, put it on something, and make sure it's still good. Or if you took the route like Alex was suggesting of creating a new instance and slowly migrating devices over to it, that just means you'd leave the old instance up as well. And any new device that ever connects to it immediately gets a firmware that's going to send it over to the new NervesHub, which is what we did when we took down the public NervesHub instance. I still had lots of devices that at the time that had never connected. And so we just had a firmware it immediately got on that public instance and then would be shoved to our internal one.
If you do that like A/B, like that 2-instance strategy, when you go to shut down the old instance, as long as your NervesHub link is still good, could you like CNAME it back to your first one so those devices at the box could still connect up? Or is there anything special inside of NervesHub V1 that would?
I don't think we've done anything like anything that's like a new message, like archives, is keyed on like when your device connects, it sends up a device API version, and like it needs to be at least a known version that NervesHub link got added with archives. So like it shouldn't be sent messages that the device has no idea what it is and will crash and just continuously reboot. So I think it will be fine. Like as long as your SSL doesn't have that 24 dot whatever weirdness, like you should just be able to like reconnect or just connect to the new one and get updates and kind of move on from there. So I know we had for a while some fairly old firmware that for whatever reason devices just hadn't gotten updated, and like everything still was fine. So yeah, and like I would have to double check to make sure we don't send stuff that in the old firmware or old NervesHub link can't handle. But if it can't, then that's something we can kind of wrap around a version check and make sure that it doesn't tank old things.
I don't think the problem would be the messages that an older NervesHub link would get. That's been the messages back and forth have been pretty constant, and we've really only added to it.
Yeah, well, yeah. So like added to it just because old NervesHub link didn't have a catch-all. So like we got something it didn't know. It was a gen server crash, and
I think your bigger problem would be I don't know enough about the DNS routing and CNAMing, but assuming your old firmwares have some sort of specific endpoint they're going to and set of certificates that they expect that server to display. And then I've never tried to handle rerouting. So if it starts to make an initial connection to old server and then gets forwarded to new server URL, if that would actually work or not. And I think that would fail, especially if you have the server name indication put into your firmware as well.
I think we pin the cert of what we're trying to connect to. So if you're just using like the like trust chain, it probably would work. Assuming your server is, if you see name, if it presents the what is it, additional sans, or I can't remember what it's called, but the additional like domain names, if it includes the CNAME, then that should be fine. So it kind of depends on what your previous SSL strategy was, and hope you did it right.
I was just going to add one thing that does come to mind is, and this is something that we ran into at GridPoint. If you did re-roll or by any chance are going between environments, and each environment has different signing keys, then that's definitely a hiccup. But a way around that is set up an intermediate firmware so that the NervesHub you're coming from is able to dish that out to your devices. And once it updates, it's going to connect to the new environment. And then once the devices are connected to the new environment, then it gets the final firmware to land on, which has the correct everything.
Alternatively, you could pay a bunch of interns to go rummage through some boxes
and manually update things.
Yeah. Depending on how many boxes it is, I guess.
If it'd be interesting to know what the last commit was that you're on, and if it's running locally, to just set up the database, the local database with that. Fast forward to the last 2.0 commit, the one on main, and just run migrations and see what happens.
Yeah.
Which is something I've never done, but we very much went very incrementally.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we're at. I know it's time to break out the Indiana Jones fedora and whip.
I'm trying to remember, were there any updates around deployments and the many-to-many connections with tags? Because that was definitely one of the 1.0 pain points.
So you pick your tags and your version requirements, and then the new thing is that devices will be assigned a deployment and like get stuck to it. Unless tags change, or your version unversion is that itself out. So on Connect, it will try and pick one, or if it has one, it'll just make sure it still matches, and then it's done. Like it just gets those updates. Because I know you could definitely very, very easily set yourself up to have a dueling deployment and just like kind of bounce back and forth. So that kind of thing should happen less, because once you're stuck to it, you won't get the other one unless you like somehow cancel out your deployment through something like a manual or a version. So Yeah, and that also enables us to do the like rolling updates.
Internally, basically no. The tagging mechanism functions the same. What Eric's showing with the assigned or alternate deployment, we did add the ability to do, like when we resolve a deployment, we save the deployment ID with the device record now. So it's not this huge lookup every time. We're trying to resolve what deployment is done based on these tags less. But visually, we did add things like this on the device page where you can see what was the last deployment we resolved and assigned that we think is the most current. Did any more match, shown as the alternate. And if you go back to the deployments page, Eric, deployments are basically separated by, there's that too. Deployments are basically separated by architecture, and some people might use the same tag, but that won't resolve because it's like tag architecture, technically. So now we display, here's your deployments based on the target, the architecture, the platform, actually, I think is the word.
Yeah, platform.
So I think that there's still pain there, but there's more visual cues to hopefully help the pain. And something to work out and improve for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see this coming along because it was, especially as your tags add up, it gets increasingly easier to get into that dueling deployment situation.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, especially when you're, especially with the test hardware, and when you're trying to distribute hardware to other folks, or devices to other folks on the team and stuff like that, where you're probably taking it off the warehouse shelf or something that was more or less tagged to production, and then you're trying to assign it to somebody else. And if you forget to remove the production tag from that device, and you just say, "Oh, hey, this is this person's device. Here's their deployment," now they start fighting with each other.
Yeah, which we definitely had. We'll get reports like it won't update, it won't do this, and you look at the logs in it. And it actually did update, but then it immediately updated back to a different version. And then it immediately, yeah.
Yeah. This is really cool to see what you did with the architecture. Because I think, I'm trying to remember, that had to be solved in the past by creating a new product for the architecture, right? Or did you have a better workaround for that?
No, it was never really displayed.
Yeah.
So we would use multiple different architectures for the same product.
This definitely needs to have platform and architecture shown up here. But
yeah, like I have several different chipsets for the single firmware, and it was mostly like we would name the deployments. This is prod deployed target N. This is prod deployed target P, and now it's just more visually baked in because we always would get that metadata from the device. We would always use it when resolving. That would have to match, and the tags as well.
Gotcha. And just to make sure I've got this right in my head too, for the way you're doing different architectures, is that different nerves system, like for the base layer there, but you're running the same Elixir application on top of it?
Yeah, maybe architecture is the wrong word because like we also might use really similar chipsets. It's more like target or platform.
Yeah,
a different nerve
there's
system.
Both. Yeah, there's platform and architecture. Architecture, I think we mostly just have stuff as like ARM, and then the platform is the like device specific. Like if you have like two different physically different things, that would be the platform.
AM335 versus all winter.
Yeah.
Basically like that kind of thing. Yeah.
I think another thing with deployments to solve is in tags is tags are kind of dual purpose in the way that we use them. We use them to both target deployments, but it's also metadata. We'll put lot numbers in there. We'll put
when it was imported,
build dates, imported dates, and if somebody trying to fumble through finding the right deployment deletes part of that, deletes that tag, that's detrimental. It's
Yeah, and we
like
are
metadata we really want to live with the device.
there is a new metadata field coming, that stuff like that could be scooted off to.
And
But
to me, it's a really weird position because in practice, I probably would never deploy off of the lot or the build number, or not in practice, not never. Like I usually don't, but I like it there's a tag because what if I discover a massive defect in lot 574? And I want to be able to quickly target those to get some sort of firmware change, special firmware change to address it.
Do you prefix this with like lot colon whatever, or is it just 1, 2, 3, 4, and you just have to know that's a lot?
No, it's like underscored. Well, or maybe it's just no spacing. Maybe it's just lot.
Yeah, I know there is one. Yeah, I know that we have a lot of like imported and then a date with like no spaces or hyphens or anything. So it's not pretty.
It imported for us because we use pre-programmed ATEC chips. And so when we get a delivery of devices, we get a manifest of all the chips that were used. And then we import whatever thousands or whatever large number of device certificates are in that manifest. And we just put them in NervesHub, all in a single import via API.
Yeah. Just because I saw it, there is also disabling updates is a little different from 1.0. There's now, previously you would like disable it or get quarantined on like the same thing and you wouldn't know why it happened. But now quarantine happens separately. So like if it updates and just kind of keeps failing, it'll get put into a penalty box for a day, an hour, whatever you set it at. And then it will like automatically come out of it and try again in case it was just Wi-Fi being weird or whatever. And then if you click this disable button, that's like a user has come along and said like, do not do this. And that overrides pretty much everything. And along with that, you can now send a specific version if you need to, mostly for probably a dev or QA or whatever.
Yeah, this is probably more towards Alex's point. You've got development or Q or whatever devices. I guess instead of going deeper into the deployment setup, we just added a button and send one version to the device you want.
That's really nice.
And when you send an update, it automatically disables updates. So it's not going to like reboot and just like update to whatever it was set to. So
that looks even better than having to set up a deployment for everybody who wants to deploy. This is really cool.
Yeah, I know we really want to shift of who can manage deployments and have it be just very locked down and then more difficult to change and not a primary mechanism for development and testing. I mean, I guess it can be, but this is one way we get around it very quickly.
Yeah, this definitely seems like the first case to solve for. One of the things I've seen, though, to the other side of this is some ability for NervesHub or something that connects to NervesHub, but probably ideally NervesHub to have like a read-only type mode, if you will, or like a QA type mode. So you can have some folks in there with access to a subset of devices that are like the QA devices or the development devices or whatever, and be able to let them pick the firmware that gets put on those, because they're either not developers themselves or they just shouldn't have full-blown access to like the production side of NervesHub, but they need to be able to test on units. And something like that, being able to give them like a sandbox within NervesHub to deploy to that like set of lab devices could be pretty cool. So you don't have to replicate that through other stuff, or you're not having to give those folks, here's the commands to compile and burn your own firmware, which can also take forever on certain systems, and they've just got access to the firmware that's already up in NervesHub.
Yep. Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
put that on
I know.
Josh's plate instead of your guys, though.
Yeah, I
Well,
know.
I know he's
We
thinking about it.
yeah, we toyed around with a read only as part of the scripts idea. Um, just because it's like they people need to come in and like maybe click a button that's like get me the message of the day, which includes a bunch of debug information that they will be useful for whatever they're doing. Of like, oh, your thing's not connected to Wi-Fi. I see it right here. Like, go do that. um, so yeah, I don't know where it's going with that, but read only has been tossed around, I guess.
That's cool. I know you guys have plenty of other priorities, and I'd definitely much rather have you focused on what you're working on right now, but cool to hear that that's being thought of.
Yeah, which that does sort of remind the NervesHub 2.0 kind of announcement post. We talked about MQTT, and that has been officially shelved for at least the next year, since we can go really far with Phoenix channels. And just from organizational wise, it just kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. And I was like, well, like, can we just not, maybe we just don't do it.
Did we talk about the socket stuff before I got on?
Yeah, a little bit, like just the that we've gone like to at least 500,000 devices, and like just production doesn't, or like our the server setup just doesn't care, which is pretty cool. There's
Yeah,
a weird there's a weird issue somewhere around 43,000 sockets per server that it just doesn't like, and I haven't cared to like figure that out. So if you have a lot of stuff, or a lot like a really large fleet, you'll want a fairly large like backing server cluster. I don't think that's that big a surprise. So
we were having issues deploying. We spent months researching an issue, trying iteration after iteration. In the end, it was a one-line default value that happened to be in Bandit.
all Bandit's fault.
And so Matt worked with us. It was great. But after we turned that off, everything worked great. And then we discovered that we could deploy really well. We had focused so hard on the thundering herd problem that we could, at a very low level, prevent devices from attempting to connect until we were ready for them to connect, and not blow up servers, and devices could rebuild state. And then we just started, Eric's been on this trail of like, well, what is our limit now? What kind of WebSocket connection load can we handle? And it's been kind of exciting.
Yeah, and Bandit so I was very interested in making sure we could get Bandit, because it lets us terminate the connection before SSL even starts. So like there's not just extra work happening, and Ops is also happy because the way we were rate limiting before in Cowboy was like dying partway through the SSL stuff, and so you just got all these like gross like info logs of like handshake failed, error, rate limit. So yeah, Bandit is definitely a lot nicer for the herd problem.
I'll throw the pitch out there too. If you're interested in this issue in more depth, watch John's NervesConf talk when that comes out, because you did a pretty good job there describing that problem in there.
Yeah. There's a lot of the NervesHub updates in that talk. Hopefully it comes out soon. There's also a PR where we removed Bandit and put a lot of details into there, and what we were seeing: pretty graphs, lots of color. Maybe I can just find it.
Yeah, we summoned The mPureDel.
That's the way to do it, by the way. You just, if you ever want help, you just revert to Cowboy and that'll trigger.
Yeah.
That'll trigger several people to get heavily invested in your problem.
What were some of the trade-offs you were looking at between the Phoenix sockets approach versus MQTT? Was it all just solving the Thundering Herd problem, or were there other aspects in there?
There was like the hope of saving bandwidth over LTE, because we already had an MQTT connection, so we were just going to ride that with NervesHub. But
there was a lot of fear of scaling. When we started running into deployment problems, the fear of scaling got stronger and stronger because we only had lots of devices in our future, lots and lots more devices being deployed in our future. So the anxiety was high to get it fixed quickly before we're too desperate. And that's what drove a lot of it. It wasn't, and it was mostly around deployments. If we ever had to make a change, that's where we just got so killed. And we were generally fine with the persistent connections. The nodes would stay up, things wouldn't really crash. It was almost entirely deployment.
Once everything was connected, the servers just kind of sit idle, and there's like not a lot of, it's like, I don't know what the real numbers are, but let's say 25% max of like CPU usage for however many thousands of devices per server. And so it's just like when things connect, that's the really bad time where you want like 10 times more servers.
Yeah, and where MQTT, the connections are handled over here by this broker or service. They can deal with the problem. We can play all day long and not have to deal with severing device connections and coming up. But since discovering this, since having way more success deploying, and way less pressure removed. Now, some of this decision has been like, well, now it's kind of nice to have two different connections. We have many cases and scenarios of which major things were saved because we had the NervesHub WebSocket. And MQTT was failing us or something. So a lot less motivation to remove the two connections now.
Yeah.
And when you're saying two connections there, that was MQTT from the side of what the product is using and the WebSocket for NervesHub. Okay.
I guess I didn't clarify that. Yeah, we have an MQTT connection for our services, and the NervesHub is this WebSocket connection. Jason asked if there's an API route for send update, and there is not to my knowledge. Well,
I might have added that. It's this upgrade. So yes, you can forcefully send you give it the firmware UUID, and it'll blast that to it.
That's yes. Yeah, for the send update button based on the device. Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out. I was immediately thinking of the hacky ways. Like, well, if you API update the deployment or reconnect the device.
Yeah, there's a reboot, reconnect, upgrade, clear the penalty box, do the script stuff. You can actually just send code directly. Yeah, lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, the send code directly is actually pretty handy for like minor routine maintenance tasks that you just have a one-off.
Yeah, I think someone in our another team has used that for various, like, I don't know exactly what he uses it for, but I believe he has a script to give it an identifier and just do whatever thing needs to be done. So
it's also slightly terrifying, but it is handy.
Yeah, I mean, the person doing it will also have access to a console, so like it's not that different, really. Moral of the story is don't let people have access to your NervesHub if you don't trust them.
Speaking of that, was there an audit log in there yet, or any plans for that on?
There is an audit log. So that's been there since before, I don't know when I got added, but it's been there the whole time I've been working on it. So various things, so you see tags change, the touch deployment has been reset. If you've updated it, disabled updates. So
it's very rudimentary.
Yeah.
When I added the audit log, we were patterning it after what Hex was doing, and then they totally changed how they do it, and we never did. And so it's okay. It needs a lot of improvement. That's definitely an area that if you get jazzed about audit logs, then please, yes, come review this and help us. Because
yeah, and I've done a tiny bit of work. I used to do a lot of pattern matching stuff to get the messages and whatnot. I think there's still a decent amount of that, but it's more set the message at the time things are happening than previously. And it used. Go ahead.
Oh, no, finish your thought.
Yeah, we used to have connect disconnect in here, but there's some rogue devices that just reconnect like way too often. So that is now a log statement. And there's enough metadata in there that you can, like, if you have Datadog, I've searched for connect disconnect stuff through that instead of here. So
yeah, that's awesome. The one thing you can do dangerous stuff in that I haven't seen in the logs here, which makes me wonder if it's in your mind, is what happens if you get into the console or you're sending code through the code endpoints. And do you know who's been pushing code commands and what they've been pushing?
Console, no.
Yeah.
I think the code endpoint, I think also no.
But we know who did it. Because we're using Xterm.js, like, I'm sure you could figure out when someone presses enter and like log what happened, but otherwise no. Yeah, that's a tricky thing that I'm sure could be figured out, but hasn't been a like top of mind thing.
The console and code stuff is one of those things which is just, I could never imagine the use cases that people end up using it for.
I won't explain them. I won't explain them here. I'll embarrass people in private about it. There's some of those. I
mean,
I've been told that
even our CTO,
an entire new product has been launched by First Code Connect. So
it's actually I can probably throw Avellino under the bus because he'll admit to this kind of stuff. But it's like, what happens when Avellino's the one who's always up till like 4 a.m. working on working on code and pushing out fixes and things. So it's like, what happens when even if you're not looking at it from like the malicious or who broke something standpoint, being able to say like, wait a second, what did I send to this device in production so I know either how to back out of it or I know how to pick up the next steps of where I was at, or that kind of stuff if you've lost your notes or
The console does save, I think it's 1,000 lines. So when you just like open it again next time, it kind of has a buffer. So that's kind of the closest thing to an audit log, I guess, of like what would I do when I was very sleepy.
Yeah, I would say everything about the audit logs is useful in the short term. Audit logs and this code tracking stuff, it's useful for maybe a day, depending on how busy your stuff's going on. Outside of like the device was updated last week or a month ago or whatever. So that's where I think there's much to be desired and improved on. Yeah, and they're not really searchable either.
Yeah.
I think you had, I don't know how many, their patch data, I don't know how many
10
pages you
pages.
had, but 10? All right.
10 pages of just like, it happened, stuff happened, but it's
And
like, I'm never going to look at.
Before we rip the disconnect out of the audit logs, I mean, we'd have 400 or 500 pages.
Yeah, like this is honestly
device.
Downloading as a CSV and looking at it and like numbers or Excel or whatever is like definitely the way to go for most of this.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
Well, baby steps. Iterative approach.
Yep.
Since you mentioned looking at the logs, I should probably throw it out there too. One of the cool things with Ring Logger is you can configure all that stuff, so you can increase the log depth, or at least if you're looking at like the logging side of things, you can increase the log depth. You can split it out by priority, so it'll save like the errors from the warnings more than you're saving like info or debug messages, or you can turn the other stuff off. So that's at least some other options out there for folks who are trying to look at it from the logging side of what happened to the system. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I added the separate rings because some of our products were a little too debug happy.
Jason was saying in the chat, seeing when a user opens the console might be interesting in the logs.
Yeah, I mean, we have the chat, which says when someone opens it, when they join, like when they're uploading stuff and whatnot. So like that honestly should probably be persisted as an audit.
Yeah, it's transient. You refresh the page and it's gone.
Yep.
I've heard an interesting request before by somebody who's not on this call, speaking of chat, so I'll just ask the question so the answer's persisted out there. Is it possible to turn off the chat if you don't want it because you're already using Slack or Teams or something like that in your org, and your org is trying to keep everything in like that written log there?
At the moment, no, but
I know you guys kind of added it for the opposite reason, so
The future of chat is in debate.
Yeah.
I think, John, the latest is that it's probably less in debate anymore. I think it's going away, and I think it's just going to be like a Google Docs bubble for who's around.
Like to say who's looking at this page.
Yeah.
The future of chat is dead.
It's everyone's. I think there's a lot of people that don't like it. Everyone who likes it doesn't like it enough. And I think Josh was wanting to rip it out too.
There is a commit hidden in there in the history where Eric rebranded the console and chat to Windows 95 theme.
Yeah, highly recommend you.
But it was very quickly vetoed.
I was sad.
There any thoughts on role-based access to different parts of NervesHub, such as the console, or being able to push updates, things like that?
Like more granular?
Yeah. So you may have some people that you want to give NervesHub access to be able to push updates, but not necessarily have console access.
Yes, this one is also in talks. Well, I think everybody's in agreement that we want granular access, but there's no spike out. Nobody has taken initiative on deciding what it looks like or starting some code for it. Because, I think we recognize that the roles as they are now are either too broadly scoped and they apply to too many It's like you apply the role and it applies for every single piece of the application needs some sort of definition for just that one role.
Mhm.
So
The very important thing is that you can actually change this from admin now.
oh yeah.
For a long, I don't know how long, it was stuck on admin. So anyone you
It was a
invited
long-
just
Everybody invited was an admin. And then
I don't even know if you could edit them after the fact.
after a while you could edit, but nobody knew or would. And then we finally fixed that you can set the role
Hey, there
when
we
you
go.
invite
Yeah.
somebody. But yeah, I'm with you, John. I want granular permissions. Because we also have times where we maybe need some individuals to help troubleshoot and to be able to enable a single device temporarily for an individual or two with specific purpose, like maybe just view or reboot or request some details or whatever. That could be very beneficial. Right now, we effectively just have organizations for support, each environment support, dev, QA, and we move devices from the production organization to there. And only the select few that have production access can move those devices for the individuals. And very much want to change, very much want to make it easier.
Clunky, but it works.
Well, do we have any other questions, opinions on NervesHub? Any Nerve specific things want to know about? Do we talk about Elixir 117 with Nerves?
No, that's probably a good one. Yeah, I'll expand on what you said as the call outs. We got Frank and Jon here, so if anyone's got Nerves questions, now's your chance. But yeah, 117, that's probably a good thing for you to inform folks on. Looks like you guys went through a little bit of jumping through some hoops on that one.
I mean, I did, but I was wrong. It actually, when Frank got involved and did way more, discovered that it was actually not as terrible as we were thinking. My problem was I was switching between Elixir or OTP versions, and pieces were missing, pieces were not recompiling, and so I was getting these seg faults on device. So that's what I get for switching too quickly, trying to move too fast. But it's coming along. Frank has done a lot of work. There were small pieces that have to change in how the application is started, and we're putting that in the tooling like we did with 115, 116, so that you get identified that's a problem before this firmware successfully builds and you put it somewhere. And maybe the biggest thing is that the new system updates require OTP 27, which only works with Elixir 117. So you can use the older systems with Elixir 117 and OTP 26, but if you're going to use the new systems with OTP 27, you have to use 117, and it's sort of a bigger, harder change. Well, I shouldn't say harder change. It's not like difficult, but it's a really direct, solid change. Am I phrasing that right, Frank? Is that how you wanted to?
I mean, yeah, it's accurate. So I think in the past we've tried to make the upgrades a little bit easier, because whenever there's a build root upgrade or an Erlang upgrade, there's always a bit of work to do, and it's kind of nice to do it in small chunks. So there are less moving parts. And I think this time was the first time that an OTP update has forced an Elixir version constraint that's been with Elixir 1.17. Now, if you have a project, there's an escape hatch, right? So if you're building a custom system and you want to use all the latest and greatest stuff in the latest Nerve system BR, but you don't want OTP 27, you can go through the Nerve step config and select an older version of OTP to use for that. So that there is an escape hatch, but for the most part, I think, at least I really hope that it upgrading to Elixir 1.17 when the new Nerve systems come out is not a hurdle and goes easily for people. So so everyone can get all the new behind the scenes features that are coming with this latest upgrade, which I think that I think the other thing to point out is that when these the new systems aren't out yet, but in addition to OTP 27, there are build root updates. In addition to the build root updates, there are Linux kernel updates. So and they're also like OpenGL Mesa 3D updates. So it affects a lot of software. For some of you, hopefully you won't see a thing. For others of you, just features will be magically enabled, because if you're on the Raspberry Pi 5, all of a sudden you'll have new features there, like the new AI features are, we pulled in the branches that support those. There's still more work if you actually want to use them, but at least it's there, right? And so there's all these little things sprinkled all over the place that will be enabled.
Was there an issue with CI that people needed to know about?
Yes. So if you're building this only affects you if you customize the system. So if you have your own custom Nerve system and you're using the Nerves Circle CI orb and the Docker package that we typically ship with our systems, which a lot of people copy paste. So this probably affects, if you don't know, you're probably affected. The image and the orb have been updated to compile as a normal user rather than as a root user. So there's a list of reasons that this was important to do. The most important one is that build root update basically forced the issue when one of the build scripts got mad that you're building as root, which probably shouldn't be doing anyway. Anyway, notes are in I've added release notes in that now that you're a normal user, every time you use app.get, that's going to be sudo app or apt. There's some things that you're going to have to sudo now. Again, the notes, I think Nerves, so John posted the build tools, that's the Circle CI orb. The Nerve system BR changelog also has a little note on there. I mean, the good news is that if you don't do this, you'll get errors, and hopefully the searches will take you to the right place. The error that you'll hit first is that you'll get an Elixir can't install error, which hopefully enough people around you in the Nerves will know that Elixir not installed is this whole thing. It's an easy update once you know. I was really hoping to get it out this week, but if it's not this week, it'll be early next week. It's real soon now. If you're adventurous, you can, of course, poke with the main branches.
I think we're in the mode where we are looking at all these libraries and you just find the little things that have been there a while, or the compiler showed a new warning, and then you see things you can't unsee.
It's very small stuff that's being fixed now, but it's all necessary, because if you don't fix it, then you'll be supporting it later on. Also gives us a chance to run a lot of these new systems, in anger, and if anything pops out after a few days of use, then we can fix it before a lot of people start using it. Just to throw out other things that just work now, new lib camera updates. So if you're on the Raspberry Pi, want to take any of the Pi cameras, do like preview video direct to like HDMI out, that works. The web kiosk stuff is is working. A few of us have web browsers, local web browsers. So you remember old times that used to be open source and you could just load it up, and then web browsers are kind of like a maintenance heavy thing to do. But thanks to a few people in the community, that's going to be back. And for Raspberry Pi 4 and 5.
Is the kiosk under the same like URL or GitHub project it used to be, or did that change?
At the moment, the latest I have I've forked under my GitHub, and people are referencing my GitHub, but I really want to put it back. So when it's like easy to use, then I'll put it back. Right now, it's like some assembly required. And if you're on Slack, I think that a few of us communicate about it. I think it's at that level, advanced user, comfortable, like with building a browser. It's probably going to be okay, but I'd say if that's not you, probably just wait a little while because this is not exactly a fun thing, and I don't know if there's enough value in learning. It just takes a long time.
Cool. And that was an overhaul to COG, if I remember that correctly.
Yeah. So we had a couple people using COG in production devices. Just it hadn't really been, updates hadn't been published. The Raspberry Pi software moved forward. A lot of things, COG and WP WebKit moved forward. A lot of things moved forward, and it was a matter of like picking up all the pieces and figuring out how all the updates, especially that the Raspberry Pi Foundation did. I think those were the ones that took me longest to make sure all those were in line. I think it's pretty exciting. It's kind of exciting to see some of this stuff work a little bit more easily, or hopefully all of you when this gets published, it'll be more easily. But I can say for me, it's more easily at the moment than it had been in the past. So hopefully it'll be easier to maintain long term.
Yeah, this sounded really cool. Were there any other updates that have happened since then, or are those the big ones?
Guess it depends on since when. I think there are videos and presentations of various updates on either networking, some sort of alarms if you go back to the code beams. I don't know if the Gig City update has been published yet, but I think without going into a lot more detail, I think that this is probably a good high level set to share with people now.
Cool. Okay, I can say also, watch for anyone who's watching this recording, check out the Gig City Elixir 2024 recordings. Frank did a talk there. John did one at NervesConf 2024. So those will have some other cool updates for what's going on here. Frank, you mentioned another one that had gone through the Slack channel that's probably good for people just to know about in general. The Nerves tool chains are published up in a repository. So if you're just trying to cross-compile stuff and get it on a system, you can use the Nerves tool chains without having to go build your own cross-compiler and all that kind of stuff. So those are available.
Right, and those are available through ASDF. There's an ASDF plugin. So it's on the Nerves project website to make it a little bit easier to install. And I think, I don't know how many people are really super familiar with the tool chains. We distribute them for convenience with Nerves, but if you're new to Nerves, if there are people new to Nerves, you're probably asking like, why in the world would the Nerves project build its own tool chains? And the answer is we get the exact same configuration on both Mac and XA and Linux, and everywhere we build. That's pretty important to the project that whenever you compile something, you get the exact same thing, no matter where you're building. And while there are a lot of tool chains and a lot of sources for tool chains, and the configurations are published, having ones that can go across platforms is a challenge for all the architectures and platforms that Nerve supports. So we just build and publish all of them. ourselves.
Let me ask a question about the ASDF side of things.
Oh, the ASDF?
Yep, yep. So I wound up using RTX, which is now Mize, and they use ASDF plugins. There's not any particular reason why I'm allergic to ASDF other than I've just started using Mize. Have you tried that with that, or should I be the beta tester on it?
So I think I'm the lone person that uses ASDF at SmartRent. I think everyone else kind of upgrade to Mize. But the person who wrote the ASDF plugin, do you know if does Ben use Mize?
I don't know.
He may not. Well, the person who submitted the code for the ASDF plugin did that, and we were all thankful that he did it. And I have no clue what the Mize version would look like, or how much effort or anything that there is there. I assume that if someone put in some effort to figure out how to make it work, that that would probably pique the interest of a couple people. At least it's who've used this current ASDF plugin to help out.
Cool. I was just working through the toolchain install again for Nerves after being away for a while, and noticed ASDF everywhere. So I guess I can check that out and see if there's any caveats. So
I guess the other thing is this ASDF plugin is a special use case. So Nerves, if you're just building stuff, Nerves will pull the toolchain down. You don't need ASDF or anything. It just automatically installs it and sets up the paths and everything so that when you're compiling a mixed project, it just works. The ASDF plugin was more for, I want to build just some C thing just by itself outside of Nerves. But if there's this CC precompiler package, right? If you want to do precompiled C assets for an Elixir project, to like how do you build those? And then it comes in, well, it's nice to get the cross compilers down. And that's what led Ben Youngblood down the path to pull things into ASDF.
That's good to know. Thanks for that.
Well, it's starting to get a bit late here. Anyone else got questions for Frank, Jon, or Eric? Frank, Jon, or Eric, any last thoughts you want to leave everyone with?
Love seeing so many people here. Please help if there's a place that you have talents for. I think on the NervesHub theme, NervesHub V1 probably could use some help submitting any kind of bug fixes of that, since a lot of us have moved off of the V1 code base and it's clearly still in use. So any help would certainly be super appreciated there.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to help out with stuff?
Well, I think Jon and I are pretty active on Elixir Slack. I think we always say, I think officially, posting stuff on the forum if you have questions and stuff like that is awesome because it's very searchable. But if you are like just general, if you have simple questions like I want to do something sort of in real time, we're active on Slack, and that's probably the easiest.
Cool. And for anyone watching the recording who may have trouble logging into that Slack, if there's still issues there, feel free to reach out to me, either DM through the Meetup or through social, and leave me your email address and I'll send you a Slack invite.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say Discord is still an option, and it is active. Whenever I poke in, it is very active. Jon and I don't think Jon's as active there, and I'm not as active on Discord, but we poke in periodically, and Connor's super active there.
I was going to say, I didn't think you and Jon were on it as much. I know Connor's the Nerves core team member who really rules the Nerves Discord these days.
So if you want to talk to Connor, log on to Discord.
Yeah.
Connor will answer all questions.
Cool. Well, that sounds great. thanks, Frank and Jon, for coming out here and making an appearance. This is great to have you here. Eric, thank you very much for the NervesConf, or no, geez, I'm in the wrong mode already, for the NervesHub updates there. This was amazing to see what was coming along, and can't wait to see the other things as they roll out here.